The town of Windermere was a kind of place that made time slow down. Nestled between sharp cliffs and misty pine woods, it was the sort of coastal village travelers passed through without ever staying. But for Elias Rowe, it was a place to disappear. He arrived as dusk draped a lavender haze over the streets, his figure casting a long shadow as he stepped off the last bus of the day. With only a battered leather satchel and clothes that had seen better days, he looked like any other weary soul on the run from something invisible. His breath fogged in the cold air as he walked down the cobblestone lane toward the Seagrass Inn, an old building with seafoam green shutters and flower boxes spilling with wilting daisies. He paused at the front door, hand trembling for reasons not entirely due to the wind. The quiet hum of the ocean behind him reminded him why he'd chosen Windermere, isolated, unremarkable, and unlikely to host anyone who read literary magazines or paid attention to publishing news. Elias had always blended in easily, gray coats, downturned eyes, a voice low enough to vanish in a crowd. But lately, the weight he carried was becoming harder to conceal. It showed in the lines carved deep around his mouth, in the silver strands overtaking his thick hair, and most of all, in the way he walked, as if the very ground beneath him whispered memories he'd rather forget. He stepped inside. The scent of burning cedarwood and something faintly citrusy greeted him. The inn's lobby was small but warm. Woven rugs softened the old wood floor, and a fireplace flickered behind a wall of bookshelves. Behind the front desk sat a young woman scribbling something furiously into a notebook. She had auburn hair tied in a braid that draped over one shoulder and wore an oversized cardigan that made her look even smaller than she already was. She didn't notice Elias at first. He cleared his throat gently. She looked up, blinking as if waking from a dream. "Oh, hi. Sorry, I didn't hear you come in." "It's all right," he said, voice rough from disuse. "Just looking for a room." She smiled warmly. "You're in luck. Only a few guests this week." "Name?" He hesitated. "Simon Dale." The lie came easily now. It was the name on the fake ID tucked neatly in his coat pocket, one of several he kept for emergencies. She typed something on an old computer and handed him a brass key dangling from a sea glass pendant. "Room 3B. Breakfast's at 8, but no pressure. I'm Maura, by the way." He gave a tight nod. "Thanks." Just as he turned to head upstairs, she squinted at him. "Wait. Do I know you?" His heartbeat faltered. "I don't think so. You just seem familiar. Like someone I've seen before." Her brow furrowed, studying his face. He adjusted his scarf, pulling it higher over his mouth. "I get that sometimes." She let it drop with a smile, oblivious to the storm now raging behind his calm demeanor. Room 3B was cozy, too cozy for someone trying not to feel. Pale blue curtains fluttered slightly from a drafty window, revealing a view of the harbor lights flickering in the distance. A quilted blanket covered the bed, and in one corner sat a small bookshelf with well-worn paperbacks. He dropped his satchel beside the desk and sat heavily on the edge of the bed, head in hands. Elias hadn't slept properly in months. Maybe years. Not since the orchard's secret made him famous. Or rather, made Harper Blackwood famous, a pen name born out of desperation and cowardice. The world believed the story belonged to him, hailed him as a prodigy. But it wasn't his. The real author had been his older brother, Nolan. Brilliant, gentle, and endlessly supportive. When Nolan died in a sudden car accident, Elias had been the only one left to handle his affairs. And among Nolan's belongings, a completed manuscript, polished and perfect. Elias had submitted it out of grief at first, or so he told himself. But when the publisher called days later offering a contract, something inside him shifted. He said yes. He said it was his. And from that moment on, the lie took on a life of its own. Now, 5 years later, he had nothing left but regret and a half-written novel that he could never bring himself to finish. That night, Elias wandered through the quiet town, avoiding the main street where the few taverns still buzzed with conversation. Windermere was beautiful under moonlight, seagulls sleeping on the docks, waves licking at the rocks below, lanterns swaying in the salty breeze. But even beauty couldn't soothe him anymore. Not when every kind gesture reminded him he didn't deserve it. When he returned to the inn, Maura was still at the desk, nose deep in a book. Her eyes lit up when she noticed him, but then something shifted in her expression. "You're back early." He offered a vague shrug. "What are you reading?" he asked, before he could stop himself. She held up the book, its glossy cover catching the firelight. His stomach dropped. "The Orchard's Secret." "You're a fan?" he said cautiously. "Oh, completely obsessed," she said with a laugh. "It's my third time through it. Harper Blackwood's style is just something else. Mysterious and intimate. It's like the book knows your secrets." He forced a smile. "Sounds intense. You've never read it?" "No." Mara tilted her head. "You should. It's healing, in a strange way. Like it helps you forgive yourself." Elias almost laughed at the irony. Instead, he just nodded and retreated to his room, the image of the book's title burning behind his eyes. Later that night, he lay awake in the dark, listening to the sound of waves and distant wind chimes. For a moment, he let himself remember Nolan, his voice, his patience, the way he used to read aloud with every character given a distinct tone. Nolan would have never wanted this. Elias knew it deep in his bones. The town of Windermere might be his last stop. Not because he feared being caught, but because he couldn't keep carrying the lie any further. Something had to break. Maybe, just maybe, it would happen here. Elias woke to the scent of cinnamon and brewed coffee drifting up through the floorboards. Morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and golden. For a moment, he felt as though he'd woken up in a life that wasn't his. One where he was just a traveler, a quiet man in a quiet town, with no past and no secrets. But the illusion cracked the moment he saw the book on his nightstand. The Orchard's Secret. Mara had left it there, with a sticky note on the cover and looping handwriting. "If you're curious. Am." Elias stared at it, heart thudding. It was like she knew. Or maybe, she was just being kind, offering the book to a guest she'd mistaken for someone else. Still, the gesture unnerved him. He left the book untouched and made his way downstairs. The inn's dining area had just a few tables, most of them empty. Mara stood behind the counter, filling a coffee pot, humming to herself. When she saw him, her face lit up, not with the awe of recognition, but with the warmth of a familiar face. "You're up," she said cheerfully. "Sleep all right?" He nodded, settling into a corner table. "Better than expected." "I made cinnamon rolls," she said, already placing a plate in front of him. "Fresh. My grandmother's recipe." Elias offered a quiet thanks, unsure how to respond to such casual kindness. He hadn't been on the receiving end of it in a long time. She poured him coffee and sat across from him without asking. "So, Simon Dale," she said with a grin, "what brings a mystery man like you to Windermere?" He hesitated. "Just needed somewhere to breathe." She nodded, her expression softening. "A lot of people come here for that. This place is like a lighthouse for the lost." He said nothing, chewing slowly, trying to keep the walls up. But she was easy to talk to, disarmingly so. Her presence didn't demand confessions, but invited them. They talked about mundane things, the unpredictable weather, the noisy seagulls that ruled the harbor, the town's one and only bookstore that doubled as a bakery. She asked no prying questions, and he offered no hints about who he really was. But that evening, everything shifted. The storm rolled in suddenly, with howling winds and sideways rain. The power went out just after sunset, plunging the inn into flickering candlelight. Mara lit lanterns and placed them in the hallways, creating a strange, warm glow. She knocked gently on Elias's door. "I figured you might want company. Or a distraction." He hesitated, then opened the door. She held up a deck of cards and a bottle of wine. Storm night essentials. They sat at a table near the fireplace in the common room, playing a quiet game of rummy as thunder rolled outside. Elias had loosened his scarf and taken off his cap, feeling safer in the dim light. "You're different from the other guests," Mara said eventually, not looking at him. "How so?" "You don't fidget. Don't talk to yourself. You observe. Like someone who used to speak a lot, but stopped." Elias looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe I just don't have much left to say." She set her cards down. "Or maybe you are afraid of what you'd hear yourself say out loud." The words struck too close to home. He poured himself more wine. "What makes you so curious about people?" I like puzzles, she said with a small smile. I used to want to be an editor. Books were my whole world growing up. I thought if I could fix a broken sentence, maybe I could fix a broken heart. Elias chuckled bitterly. And how's that working out? Mixed results, she said. But it helps me see people. Even when they're trying not to be seen. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, Elias's face was bathed in light. Mara's expression changed. Something clicked. She leaned forward. I know this is going to sound insane, but you look like Harper Blackwood. His heart stopped. She laughed, shaking her head. Sorry, I didn't mean to freak you out. I'm just obsessed with his work. I even joined a fan forum once. Everyone speculates about who he really is. I mean, he's never done an interview. Not a single photo online. It's bizarre. He forced a smile. Maybe he doesn't want to be found. Maybe, she agreed, but there was a thoughtful glint in her eye. Or maybe he's hiding something. Elias suddenly stood. I should get some air. You're going out in the storm? He didn't answer. He just walked out the front door, letting the rain soak through his shirt. That night, he sat under the awning of the boathouse, staring out at the Black Sea. The wind howled around him, but his mind was louder. She was too close. He could feel it. If she kept looking at him like that, with curiosity and kindness, he would break. And yet, he didn't want to run this time. Back in his room, soaked and shivering, he saw the book still waiting on the nightstand. He picked it up. His hands trembled as he opened the first page. The dedication hit him like a dagger. For every story you told me before I ever found the words to tell one of my own. He closed it, pressing the cover to his chest. He didn't sleep that night. The next day, he avoided Mara. He left early, walked far beyond the town limits, sat by the rocky cliffs until his legs went numb. When he returned, she was gone from the front desk. He felt oddly disappointed. But later that evening, he found her alone in the lounge, again with a book. This time, not his. Something else. He stood for a long time before approaching. Mind if I sit? She looked up, surprised. Then smiled. Of course. He lowered himself into the chair beside her, feeling strangely nervous. I wanted to apologize, he began. For being guarded. You've been nothing but kind. She shrugged. I've worked in hospitality long enough to recognize people who carry heavy bags. Even invisible ones. He looked down at his hands. I've been carrying something for a long time. Too long. She didn't speak. Just waited. And though he wasn't ready to say everything, a small part cracked open. I didn't write that book, he said, so quietly it almost disappeared. Mara looked at him, eyes wide but soft. Elias met her gaze. I stole it. For a long moment, there was only silence between them, Mara, sitting motionless with the book still open in her lap, and Elias, hands clenched together, unable to meet her eyes. The confession hung in the air like a crack of lightning that had just torn through the calm. I stole it, he repeated, this time louder. The book everyone thinks I wrote. The Orchard's Secret. It wasn't mine. Mara didn't speak right away, and the stillness felt unbearable. The only sounds came from the soft creak of the wooden inn around them and the wind brushing against the windows. Elias stood abruptly, starting to pace the floor. I know how this sounds. I wouldn't believe it either if someone told me. But I need you to hear it. All of it. Her voice came gently. Then tell me. He took a breath, shoulders rising and falling with the weight of what he was about to unravel. 5 years ago, my brother Nolan died. A car accident. A rainy night. I was the one who had to identify the body. His voice cracked, and he turned away for a second, composing himself. He was older by 7 years. My hero, in a way. A writer, but not a published one. He wrote for himself. He had notebooks, scraps of paper, files, every corner of his apartment was filled with half-written worlds. Mara's eyes softened, but she still said nothing. When I went to clean out his place, Elias continued, I found it. A manuscript in a folder on his desk, perfectly formatted, complete. The Orchard's Secret. I read it in one sitting, on the floor, surrounded by his things. It broke me. It was beautiful. Emotional. Honest. He ran a hand through his hair, his voice lowering. And in my grief, I did something unthinkable. I copied it onto my own laptop. Submitted it to a contact I had at a small publishing firm. I told myself it was just to see what they'd say. To know if he was as brilliant as I thought. Mara leaned forward slightly, her gaze unreadable. They loved it. Offered me a contract within a week. And I didn't correct them. I let them believe I wrote it. I even created a pen name, Harper Blackwood, because I was too much of a coward to use my own. But not too much of a coward to claim my brother's genius as mine. He stopped pacing and leaned against the wall, head low. Then it became a bestseller. Awards. Reviews. Interviews I dodged. I turned into a ghost author with a cult following. And all the while, I was drowning. Every time someone told me I was gifted, I felt like I was suffocating under a truth I couldn't undo. Mara looked down at the book in her lap. "You've been carrying this for 5 years?" she asked quietly. "Yes. And it's killing me." The silence returned. Elias braced for anger, disgust, betrayal, any of the things he would deserve. But when Mara spoke again, her voice held something else entirely. "Why now? Why tell me?" He looked at her. "Because you were kind when you didn't need to be. And because I'm tired of lying to everyone, especially myself. You see me, really see me, and I don't want to keep hiding from that." She closed the book and set it aside. "I won't lie, Elias. What you did was wrong. Deeply wrong. And it hurt people, even if they don't know it yet. You stole someone else's legacy. Your own brother's, no less." He nodded, shame rising like a tide in his throat. "But," she continued, "you also didn't cash in on it endlessly. You vanished. You didn't write sequels or sell movie rights. You didn't pretend to be something you're not for long. You've been running from this lie more than you've been living off it." Elias sat down, a bit of hope flickering inside him. "So, what does that mean?" "It means you're not irredeemable," she said simply. "But you owe the truth, to your readers, to your brother's memory, and to yourself." "I don't know how to do that." Mara took a breath. "Start by giving him the credit. Publicly. Even if it ruins your career, your name. Maybe it's not about saving your reputation. Maybe it's about freeing yourself." Elias rubbed his face. "The publisher will be furious. The press will rip me apart." "Maybe," she said. "But you've already lived through the hardest part. The guilt. The hiding. You're still here." He looked at her, truly looked at her, her calm expression, the steady compassion in her eyes. She wasn't judging him. She wasn't forgiving too easily either. She was just present. "I haven't written anything since," he admitted. "Nothing worth reading. Every time I try, I hear his voice. Like I'm an imposter holding a stolen crown." Mara smiled softly. "Then maybe it's time to write as yourself. Not as Nolan. Not as Harper Blackwood. As Elias." He let that sink in. The idea terrified him. And yet, for the first time, it didn't seem impossible. "Would you help me?" he asked. "With what?" "Figuring out how to tell the world. And maybe reading something I try to write again. Just to see if it's worth anything." She picked up the book again and held it out to him. "I loved this story. But if you ever find your own voice, the one buried under all this, that is the book I really want to read." Elias took the book, cradling it like something fragile. Maybe not just the story, but the truth inside himself too. That night, he didn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't because of guilt. It was because he finally knew what he had to do. The next morning, the sea was calm again, as if the storm had never happened. But Elias felt the thunder still rumbling in his chest. For years, he'd worn his secret like a second skin, tight, suffocating, and inescapable. Now, with Mara's words echoing in his mind, he knew the time had come to shed it, even if it meant walking into the fire. He sat at the small desk in his room at the Seagrass Inn, the window open to let in the sharp scent of salt and pine. In front of him sat a blank notebook. Not a laptop, not a Word document. Just paper. Tangible. Vulnerable. He stared at the first page for nearly 20 minutes before finally writing one word at the top. Truth. He didn't try to sugarcoat it. He didn't mask his confession in metaphors or distant third-person narratives. He wrote exactly what happened, the night Nolan died, the moment he found the manuscript, the decision he made in grief that became a prison of shame. It took hours. He only stopped to sip cold coffee or rub the ache from his cramping hand. And when it was done, 12 full pages of ink-smeared truth, he didn't feel proud. He felt terrified. Mara read it in the lounge as the fire crackled beside her. Elias sat across from her, hands clenched so tight his knuckles went white. She didn't speak as she read, her brow furrowed, eyes scanning every word with silent intensity. When she finished, she set the notebook down. "It's raw," she said. "Painful. Honest." He looked at her, searching for any sign of judgment. "But is it enough?" "It's a beginning." They sat in silence for a while, the storm inside Elias beginning to quiet. The next step was the publisher. Elias had no idea how they would react. The manuscript for The Orchard Secret had been accepted through a small, now defunct imprint that had since been absorbed by a larger company. His former editor, Clara Wexler, had moved up the ranks and now oversaw acquisitions for the entire literary fiction division. He hadn't spoken to her in years. Mara helped him draft the email. It was short, to the point, and came with the attached document titled simply, "My Confession." He hit send. Then they waited. 2 days passed. Elias could barely eat, barely speak. Every time he opened his inbox, his stomach twisted into knots. On the third day, a reply arrived. Subject: regarding your message. From Clara Wexler. To Elias Rowe, aka Harper Blackwood. Elias, I read your confession. Twice. I won't lie. I'm furious. And I'm heartbroken. Not just for the publishing house, or for the fans, but for you. Because I remember the first time I read The Orchard's Secret and believed I had discovered a once-in-a-generation voice. Now I know I was hearing an echo. That said, I appreciate your honesty, late as it may be. I've spoken to legal. This will be messy, but not impossible to fix. We'll need a formal statement, and if you're willing, a press conference. The world will judge you, Elias. But some will understand. Let's talk soon. Clara. He read the email a dozen times, each time a little more of the dread falling away. It wasn't absolution, but it was something close to permission, to begin again. The press conference was scheduled for the following week in a modest hall in downtown Portland. Clara insisted on a live stream for transparency. "You're not hiding behind a screen anymore," she said. "You're facing the world." Elias barely slept in the days leading up to it. Mara stayed by his side, helping him rehearse, calming his spirals of panic. "What if they destroy me?" he asked her one night. "Then let them," she replied. "Let the old you be destroyed. And let something honest rise in its place." The day of the conference arrived. The room was packed with journalists, literary critics, influencers, and fans. Cameras lined the back wall. At the front sat a long table with a single microphone. Elias stood behind it, pale but composed, a copy of The Orchard's Secret beside him. He didn't speak from notes. He spoke from memory. "I am not Harper Blackwood," he began. "That name was never mine to begin with. And neither was the story you all loved." He told them everything. About Nolan. About the manuscript. About the moment he crossed the line and never looked back. About the years of running, of hiding, of pretending he had written something that didn't come from his soul. "I can't change what I did," he said at the end. "But I can stop lying. I can give credit to the man who truly deserves it. My brother. Nolan Rowe." There were gasps. Some tears. And as expected, anger. The backlash came swiftly. Social media lit up with hashtags, #BlackwoodLie, #Nolan deserved better, #author fraud. Fans felt betrayed. Critics called for boycotts. His publisher faced pressure to retract all sales. But in the sea of outrage, a surprising wave of support emerged. Some readers praised his courage for coming forward. Others said they now wanted to read Nolan's version, knowing the man behind it had written from the heart. There were even fans who admitted they admired Elias more now, not for the lie, but for the strength it took to confess. In the weeks that followed, Elias worked with the publisher to re-release The Orchard's Secret under Nolan's name, complete with a new foreword written by Elias himself, this time, signed with his real name, no aliases. The new edition sold well. Even better than expected. The true story behind the book brought a wave of curiosity, and Nolan's name began to circulate in literary circles as a kind of posthumous legend, a man whose words lived on because his brother had finally found the courage to do what was right. Elias began writing again, quietly. He didn't expect acclaim, and he didn't want it. But Mara was the first to read his new stories. She told him they weren't Nolan's voice, and that was a good thing. "They're yours," she said. "They sound like someone finally learning to speak without shame." One evening, after the worst of the storm had passed, Elias stood on the cliffs overlooking Windermere. Mara joined him, hands tucked into the sleeves of her sweater. "Feels different now," he said. She glanced at him. "You feel different." "I think I am." He looked out at the sea, vast, unending, but no longer threatening. "I want to stay here. For a while. Maybe longer." Mara smiled. "Then stay." He reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. 1 year later, the town of Windermere looked much the same, mist curling off the cliffs, gulls circling above the docks, and the seagrass inn still standing with its sea glass shutters and daisy-filled flower boxes. But for Elias Rowe, everything had changed. He stepped off the train with a simple leather satchel slung over his shoulder, but this time, he didn't carry it like a shield. His shoulders weren't hunched with shame. His eyes weren't buried beneath a cap. He walked upright, head high, breathing in the ocean air like it was the first real breath of his life. The world knew his story now. They knew the truth behind The Orchard's Secret. They knew about Nolan. And they knew about the lie that had haunted Elias for years. But more importantly, they knew the man who'd chosen to step into the light, even if it meant tearing down everything he'd built. And remarkably, the world hadn't destroyed him. His literary career hadn't ended, it had transformed. After the press conference, his publisher encouraged him to submit his own work under his real name. He was hesitant at first, convinced no one would ever take him seriously again. But to his surprise, his first post-confession novella, The Weight of Lanterns, was quietly released and found its own loyal readers. It didn't become a bestseller. It didn't go viral. But it didn't need to. People read it, discussed it, and connected with it. And that was enough. The moment Elias pushed open the inn's door, he was greeted by the familiar scent of citrus polish and cedarwood. The place looked just as it had a year ago, only now it felt more like a homecoming than an escape. At the front desk, Mara looked up from a stack of mail and broke into a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. "Well," she said, standing. "Look who finally found his way back." Elias smiled, the kind of smile he hadn't known how to wear back then. "Told you I might stay longer next time." She walked around the desk, arms outstretched, and he pulled her into a quiet hug. It wasn't rushed or awkward. It was the kind of hug people gave when they knew what the other had been through, when they'd walked beside them during the hardest parts. "I saved your room," Mara said as they pulled apart. "Room 3B? Of course. Thought you might want a familiar window to stare out of while pretending to write." He laughed. "You know me too well." They walked up the stairs together, side by side. Later that evening, they sat on the back deck of the inn, a pot of chamomile tea between them. The sun was setting over the horizon, staining the water orange and gold. "I've been writing again," Elias said quietly. Mara turned to him, encouraging but not pressing. "2 full drafts," he added. "1 short story collection, and a novel. All mine. No pen names." "That's incredible," she said. "Are you sending them out?" "Not yet," he admitted. "Still battling that little voice in my head that says Nolan's shadow is too long. But it's quieter now. More like a whisper than a scream." Mara nodded. "That's progress. Besides, your voice matters too. It always did. It just got buried." Elias looked out at the sea. "I still think about him. All the time." "You should. He's part of you. But so is the man you're becoming." He glanced at her. "You know, if you hadn't pushed me that night, if you hadn't told me to stop hiding, I might still be running." She reached over and gently squeezed his hand. Sometimes we need someone else to remind us that we're allowed to stop. They sat in silence for a while, watching the waves roll in. Over the next few weeks, Elias settled into life in Windermere. He became a familiar face around town, often seen walking with a notepad or reading in the bookstore cafe. The locals, initially wary after the headlines, warmed up to him again. Some even approached to share how much they respected his honesty, how they'd reread The Orchard's Secret through a new lens. One afternoon, a teenage boy approached him outside the bookstore. "You're Elias Rowe, right?" the boy asked shyly. Elias hesitated. "Yes. That's me. I just wanted to say. I read your story. Not just the book, but your article in the literary journal. About Nolan. And your own writing. It helped me." Elias blinked, touched. "Helped you how?" "I want to be a writer too. But I always felt like I wasn't good enough. That everything I wanted to say had already been said better. But your honesty, it made me feel like maybe my voice matters, even if it's not perfect." Elias knelt a little to meet the boy's eyes. "It does matter. Don't let anyone, not even yourself, convince you otherwise." The boy nodded, clutching a paperback to his chest before walking away. And in that moment, Elias realized something: telling the truth hadn't just freed him. It had opened a door for others too. On the 1-year anniversary of Nolan's death, Elias stood at the edge of the cliffs, the same place he'd come to so often in the early days. He carried a bouquet of windflowers, Nolan's favorite, and a printed copy of the re-release The Orchard's Secret with Nolan's name on the cover. He placed both on the rocks and spoke softly into the wind. "I did it, Nolan. They know now. The world knows it was yours. I'm sorry it took so long. I hope wherever you are, you see how much they loved your words." He stayed there until the sun dipped low, letting the breeze carry away what remained of his guilt. When he returned to the inn, Mara was waiting for him with dinner and 2 glasses of wine. "To Nolan," she said, raising her glass. Elias raised his in return. "To Nolan. And to starting again." That night, in his room, Elias opened a fresh notebook and wrote the first sentence of his next novel. It was nothing like The Orchard's Secret. It was messier, more experimental, more personal. But it was his. And that, finally, was enough. As he wrote, he heard the soft laughter of guests downstairs, the creak of Mara moving through the hall, the wind stirring through the trees outside. The world was no longer a place he had to hide from. He was no longer writing to prove anything. He was writing because it was who he truly was. And this time, the name on the cover would be his.